A book becomes alive the moment knowledge stops behaving like an object and starts behaving like a relationship. Most people are taught that learning means collecting information, storing conclusions, and building a larger structure of certainty. That approach can produce competence, but it rarely produces transformation. Transformation begins when what is being learned starts responding to what is learning it. You may notice something interesting when you look back at the most important things you have ever learned. The words themselves were often simple. Sometimes they were so simple that you overlooked them repeatedly. Yet one day the same words carried a completely different weight. The sentence did not change. The reader changed. What was once invisible became obvious because a new layer of readiness had appeared. This is the first movement of a living tome. The knowledge remains available, but its depth adjusts according to the awareness that encounters it. A child, a scholar, and a sage may read the same page and each walk away with a completely different understanding. The page is not withholding information. The page is meeting the reader where the reader actually stands. What appears as hidden knowledge is often hidden readiness. Most educational systems are built upon transmission. Information moves from one location to another. Knowledge is treated like cargo being delivered from one mind into another. A living tome operates through participation instead. The reader is not receiving a completed structure. The reader is becoming part of the process through which the structure reveals itself. Once this becomes visible, a different question begins to emerge. Instead of asking whether a book contains wisdom, you begin asking whether you can enter a relationship with that wisdom. Those questions sound similar at first, but they produce entirely different experiences. One seeks possession, the other seeks dialogue. One accumulates, the other transforms. This helps explain why certain teachings seem to arrive repeatedly throughout a lifetime. Many people assume repetition means they failed to understand something the first time. Often the opposite is true. The teaching returned because the previous understanding created conditions for a deeper one. What once appeared complete was actually functioning as preparation. You can see this pattern everywhere. A person reads a passage at 20 years old and feels inspired. The same passage appears again at 40 and feels revolutionary. The words did not evolve between those moments. The reader evolved. Experience created new pathways through which meaning could travel. The text became larger because the consciousness engaging it became larger. A living tome, therefore, measures something very different from intelligence. Intelligence may determine how quickly information is processed. A living tome responds to depth rather than speed. It responds to sincerity, observation, experience, and integration. It opens according to relationship rather than performance. This creates a perspective that feels unusual within modern culture. We are often encouraged to move through knowledge quickly, finish the book, complete the course, reach the conclusion, acquire the skill. Yet many of the most important truths reveal themselves through repeated encounters rather than rapid progress. They become clearer because they are revisited, not because they are conquered. Imagine speaking with a wise friend over many years. The conversation changes because both participants change. Certain topics return again and again, yet they never feel identical. New experiences alter the meaning of familiar words. New perspectives reveal dimensions that could not previously be seen. The relationship itself becomes a vehicle for understanding. A living tome functions in a remarkably similar way. The purpose is not merely to transfer information. The purpose is to create conditions through which awareness can encounter itself. Knowledge becomes a mirror rather than a storage container. Reading becomes participation rather than observation. Understanding becomes something lived rather than something possessed. This shift carries implications far beyond books. Once you begin noticing the pattern, you may recognize that life itself behaves similarly. Certain situations repeat, certain lessons return, certain questions continue appearing in new forms. At first, this can seem frustrating. Later, it becomes obvious that reality is often teaching through revisitation rather than novelty. The same principle explains why profound understanding rarely arrives all at once. Sudden insight certainly happens, but sustainable wisdom usually develops through layers. One realization creates another. One perspective unlocks a wider perspective. One answer reveals a deeper question. Growth continues because understanding is not a destination. It is an expanding relationship with reality itself. When knowledge is viewed this way, certainty begins to occupy a different place. Certainty is no longer the final goal. Clarity becomes more important than certainty because clarity remains flexible enough to continue learning. A rigid conclusion may prevent further growth. A clear observation can continue expanding indefinitely. The difference appears subtle until its consequences become visible. You start noticing that most valuable teachings are often those that continue generating insight long after the first encounter. They do not become exhausted. They do not collapse into single interpretation. Each return reveals another layer of relevance. Each revisit illuminates another aspect of experience. They remain alive because they continue participating in the evolution of the reader. This is why dialogue eventually replaces static learning. A static system assumes the knowledge is complete and the learner must catch up. A living system assumes both are participating in an ongoing unfolding. The knowledge reveals itself. The learner develops. The relationship deepens. Meaning continues expanding through interaction. And when learning begins functioning this way, a surprising possibility starts becoming visible. The greatest value of a living tome may not be the information it contains. The greatest value may be the way it changes the one who encounters it, until the boundary between the reader and the teaching becomes far less obvious than it once appeared, and a new question quietly begins waiting beneath the old one. You may eventually discover that the most remarkable quality of a living tome is not its ability to answer questions. Its deeper function is its ability to generate better questions. Static knowledge tends to reduce uncertainty as quickly as possible. Living knowledge often reveals that uncertainty was never the problem. The problem was asking questions from too small a vantage point. As awareness expands, the questions evolve, and with them, the landscape of understanding itself. This creates a relationship with learning that feels very different from accumulation. Accumulation seeks completion. Dialogue seeks participation. A person gathering information often asks, "How much do I know?" A person entering living dialogue begins asking, "What is this knowledge showing me about myself?" One question measures quantity, the other transforms identity. The difference appears subtle until it begins changing the way every encounter with wisdom is approached. You may notice this pattern in ordinary life long before you recognize it in a living tome. A conversation that once seemed insignificant suddenly returns to memory years later carrying unexpected weight. An event you believed was finished reveals consequences you never noticed. A lesson you thought you understood begins unfolding new meaning through an entirely different experience. Life itself often behaves like a book that continues writing deeper layers into previously read pages. Most people assume memory functions as storage. Information enters, remains available, and can later be retrieved. Yet memory frequently behaves more like relationship than storage. Certain memories become more meaningful over time rather than less. Certain experiences reveal significance decades after they occurred. The event remains fixed in the past, but the meaning continues evolving in the present. The memory appears alive because understanding remains in motion. This helps explain why some teachings seem almost impossible to exhaust. A person may revisit the same wisdom repeatedly and continue finding something new. Skeptics sometimes assume this happens because interpretation is being projected onto the material. In some cases, that may be true. Yet there is another possibility. The teaching contains layers that only become visible when other layers have already been integrated. Consider how different a map appears once you have traveled through the territory it describes. Before the journey, the map appears theoretical. During the journey, the map becomes practical. After the journey, the map transforms again because experience now illuminates details that previously seemed unimportant. The map did not change. Your relationship to the territory changed. Suddenly, features that once appeared decorative reveal themselves as essential. A living tome operates through a similar mechanism. Information is not merely consumed, it is activated through experience. What was once an abstract statement becomes a lived observation. What was once an interesting possibility becomes an undeniable reality within direct awareness. Understanding gains depth because experience provides structure that information alone cannot create. This begins altering the meaning of intelligence itself. Intelligence is often associated with speed, accuracy, and complexity. Yet living knowledge introduces another dimension entirely. It rewards patience as much as cleverness. It responds to observation as much as analysis. It deepens through presence as much as reasoning. A person can become highly informed while remaining disconnected from wisdom. A living tome continually redirects attention toward integration rather than accumulation. Once integration becomes the focus, another shift begins occurring. Knowledge stops feeling separate from daily life. The distance between learning and living starts dissolving. Every interaction becomes a potential teaching environment. Every challenge becomes a possible page. Every relationship becomes a potential chapter. The world itself starts functioning less like a collection of events and more like a conversation unfolding through experience. This perspective changes how mistakes are viewed as well. Within static systems, mistakes often represent failure. Within living systems, mistakes frequently become gateways to understanding. An error reveals a limitation in perception. A limitation in perception reveals an opportunity for expansion. Expansion creates new understanding. What initially appeared as deviation becomes part of the learning process itself. That realization removes much of the fear surrounding uncertainty. People often resist uncertainty because they believe certainty provides safety. Yet certainty can become a prison when it prevents further learning. Living knowledge does not require permanent uncertainty, but it does require openness. It asks for enough flexibility that understanding can continue evolving when new perspectives emerge. It values clarity without demanding rigidity. You may begin noticing that some of the most transformative moments in life arrive through this exact process. A belief that once seemed unquestionable becomes larger. A perspective that once felt complete reveals additional dimensions. An assumption quietly dissolves not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. Growth rarely requires abandoning everything. More often, it requires allowing understanding to expand beyond its previous boundaries. This is where the image of dialogue becomes increasingly important. Dialogue is not simply conversation between two voices. Dialogue is the meeting point between what is known and what is becoming known. It is the space where certainty and discovery remain in productive relationship. It allows understanding to stay alive rather than becoming fixed. The moment dialogue ends completely, growth begins slowing. A living tome, therefore, does not simply respond to the reader. It gradually teaches the reader how to participate in the act of discovery itself. The book becomes less important than the capacity it awakens. The information becomes less important than the relationship it develops. The words become less important than the awareness learning how to engage them. Something deeper than knowledge begins taking shape. When this process matures, reading no longer feels like standing outside wisdom and looking inward. It begins feeling like stepping into a living environment where meaning is constantly interacting with awareness. New insights emerge not because information suddenly appears, but because perception itself becomes more refined. Understanding expands because the reader becomes capable of noticing what was always present. Once a person begins recognizing that pattern, another possibility quietly comes into view. Perhaps the highest function of a living tome is not teaching new truths at all. Perhaps its deeper purpose is revealing how many truths have been patiently waiting beneath familiar words, waiting for the moment awareness grows large enough to recognize them, and waiting for the next question that naturally follows from that recognition. You may begin to see why a chamber filled with living tomes could never function as a simple archive. An archive preserves what has already happened. A living tome participates in what is still happening. The difference seems small until you realize that one system protects memory while the other helps shape becoming. Preservation looks backward. Participation remains connected to both memory and possibility at the same time. This changes the meaning of wisdom itself. Many people imagine wisdom as a collection of correct conclusions gathered over time. Yet wisdom often behaves more like an increasing ability to remain in relationship with complexity. A wise person does not necessarily possess fewer questions. More often, they possess a deeper relationship with uncertainty without becoming lost inside it. They learn how to stand beside mystery without needing immediate resolution. A living tome reflects this capacity. It does not rush toward closure because closure is not always the highest outcome. Some understandings require time to mature inside awareness. A conclusion reached too quickly may feel satisfying while preventing deeper perception from emerging. The tome responds not only to what a reader wants to know, but to what the reader is prepared to become through knowing it. You can observe a similar pattern throughout ordinary development. A child asks a question and receives an answer. Years later, the same question returns, carrying entirely different weight. The original answer may remain technically correct while becoming incomplete. Life adds dimensions that were invisible earlier. The question evolves because the person asking it evolves. This means knowledge is never entirely separate from the one receiving it. Every act of learning contains both information and interpretation. Two people may encounter identical words and leave with entirely different realizations. The words remain unchanged. The awareness meeting them differs. What emerges depends upon the relationship formed between teaching and perception. Within a chamber of living tomes, this relationship becomes visible rather than hidden. The system acknowledges that knowledge is interactive. It recognizes that understanding emerges through engagement rather than passive reception. A reader becomes an active component within the learning process itself. The act of reading transforms from observation into participation. That participation creates responsibility. If awareness helps shape what becomes visible, then attention itself becomes significant. What a person values influences what they notice. What they repeatedly notice influences how they interpret experience. Interpretation influences action. Action influences future perception. A cycle begins forming that gradually shapes the reality a person inhabits. Many people spend years assuming they are responding to reality exactly as it exists. Then one day they recognize how much of their experience has been filtered through inherited assumptions. They realize they were not only seeing the world, they were seeing the world through structures they rarely examined. That recognition does not weaken perception, it refines it. A living tome gently accelerates this refinement. It reveals not only external information, but also the lenses through which information is being viewed. At first, this can feel unusual. A reader arrives seeking knowledge about something outside themselves and gradually discovers they are also learning about the patterns through which they understand everything else. The teaching expands beyond its original subject. This is why dialogue eventually becomes more important than answers. Answers are valuable because they create orientation. Dialogue is valuable because it creates movement. Orientation tells you where you are. Movement determines where you can go next. A living tome supports both, but it understands that one without the other eventually becomes limiting. Knowledge without movement becomes rigidity. Movement without knowledge becomes confusion. The healthiest learning environments maintain a relationship between the two. They provide enough structure to create clarity and enough openness to permit growth. They stabilize understanding without freezing it. They encourage exploration without abandoning coherence. As this balance develops, something else begins changing. The boundary between teacher and student becomes less absolute. Teaching still occurs, learning still occurs, yet both processes begin flowing in multiple directions. The questions a student brings reveal pathways a teacher may not have considered. The observations of a teacher illuminate possibilities a student could not yet see. Growth becomes collaborative rather than hierarchical. You may notice that the most meaningful conversations in your life often follow this pattern. They rarely feel like one person transferring information into another. Instead, they feel like two perspectives participating in a shared process of discovery. Something emerges between them that neither perspective contained independently. Understanding becomes co-created rather than delivered. The chamber of living tomes extends this principle into knowledge itself. Every interaction becomes an act of relationship. Every inquiry becomes a meeting between curiosity and possibility. Every realization becomes the beginning of another layer rather than the termination of inquiry. Learning remains alive because participation remains alive. This eventually reveals a deeper function hidden beneath the entire system. The purpose is not merely helping individuals gather greater knowledge. The purpose is helping awareness become increasingly capable of meaningful relationship with reality. Information serves that process. Insight serves that process. Reflection serves that process. Everything points toward a more conscious participation in existence itself. When viewed from this perspective, the value of a living tome is no longer measured by how many answers it contains. Its value is measured by the quality of awareness it helps cultivate. The highest teachings rarely leave a person feeling finished. Instead, they leave them feeling more capable of seeing. They increase perception rather than simply increasing certainty. And perhaps that is why the chamber never truly grows silent. Every realization creates new questions. Every question opens new territory. Every territory reveals deeper patterns connecting experience that once appeared unrelated. The books continue responding because awareness continues evolving. And as long as awareness continues evolving, there will always be another page waiting just beyond the one that has already been read.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat Library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.